Hi, I'm Lily from Merino Evino, and if you haven't been knitting or crocheting that long, you might have some questions about different types of yarn and how you use them. So I am here to talk to you about that. Uh, a very easy yarn to work with when you're just starting out is acrylic, and that is because it's very cost effective and you can find it at most big yarn stores. It is machine washable as well, which makes it easy to make things for babies. However, some people don't like how acrylic feels on their skin when they're knitting or crocheting. Some people can have allergic reactions, and it just isn't the best quality yarn, I should say. But it does have its purpose, it does have its uses, and as long as you take care of it, it should be able to last. Many indie dyers dye wool, and there's different strategies for how you dye based on the fiber. If you're going to be doing plant-based like cotton, you'll use a certain type of way of dyeing. And if you use wool or protein-based fibers like alpaca, any type of wool, you'll dye in other ways. So they just take the dye differently. So there's a huge amount of yarn and tons of different yarn types that you can choose from. And so how do you know which one to use? So I have a few examples here today, and I'm going to go from the thinnest yarn to the biggest. So this is a yarn I dyed with food dye, and this is lace weight yarn. So with lace weight yarn, you're going to get more yardage for the same weight, and that's why you need usually both measurements, and you can tell how many yards are left of a yarn once you know the original weight. And you can see that it's very fine, and this is a merino and silk blend. I actually dyed it with food dye, and I just loved how it came out. And I think Stephen West has a new pattern that has a color like this with another green, and I have a green as well. So you want to use lace when you're going to be making something that is like for warm weathers, like a shawl, or you're going to be knitting or crocheting lace, and you're going to use smaller needles. You can use bigger needles and just do a knit stitch and like a garter stitch, and it'll look lacy because you're using bigger needles. So if I were to cast on for a hat with this, it would take a really, really long time if I used like the size like 2 needle or something. And so that's another thing to take into consideration, especially around the holidays, is how much time do you have? Usually it's a worsted weight yarn for a hat if you want it to work up pretty quickly. So this is lace weight. Next, this is a sparkle yarn that I just dyed actually for another collaboration. And this is mostly wool with about 25% nylon and 5% stellina. And the stellina makes it glimmer, which I think is really fun. And I'm going to be dyeing up a few different colorways with this that I think the stellina will really accent. So why do you want nylon in your wool? If you are a sock knitter, you're definitely going to want some nylon because it's a little bit stretchier. And so that will help it last, and it can help prevent pilling. So that's something to take into consideration with, you want it to be fingering weight usually, fingering sock weight. In fact, they call it sock weight yarn. And that is because that's how most knitters and crocheters, I don't know if you can crochet socks, but I'm sure you can. But most knitters will use this weight to make socks, and they will they want the nylon because it helps reinforce the wool. If you have cashmere, which is extremely soft, and if you have that in a fingering sock weight yarn and you want to use make socks with it, you probably do want to reinforce it with some kind of nylon. And I actually recently learned of an Ito yarn that has stainless steel in it too, and some people use that to reinforce heels and toes, which I thought was super interesting. Apparently that's really soft too. But yes, mostly for socks, you want sock weight yarn, fingering weight yarn, and you can see how the diameter is a little bit thicker. And you want it stretchy, just like normal socks or socks that you would buy. The next weight I have is DK. I think like this weight has been really popular lately. I like it personally I mean, granted, I am dyeing it. This is my Dreaming of Maui colorway. I like DK weight because it's a little bit lighter than worsted weight, but it's thicker than the fingering weight. So again, hopefully you guys can see a difference in the thickness of the yarn. It's not too much of a difference, but it's definitely there. And I like DK weight because you can get a little bit more definition if you're doing a Fair Isle pattern or any kind of color work. It takes you a little bit longer to do a hat, but not too much longer. You can do kind of, not a lightweight shawl with it, but you can do like an early autumn shawl with it. You can do cables. So I just think DK is kind of a versatile weight to work with. So if you're a beginner, DK could work for you. Any weight can work for you. It just depends how long do you want to spend on each project. The next yarn I have is worsted weight. So we have worsted here and DK here. So they're pretty close in size, but there is a slight difference. And then we have the sock weight. So you can definitely see a difference. Worsted weight, if it's getting close to the holidays, you definitely want to be working with this. And that is because your projects will go by much faster. I have a toddler right now, and I can knit up a hat for an adult in worsted weight in a week or less. And that's, you know, working full time in addition to dyeing yarn and having a toddler. So I only get to knit about 2 hours a day, which, you know, I knit when I watch TV at night, which is just for an hour. I knit, you know, waiting for dinner because luckily my husband makes it for me. But yeah, so it takes me like maybe 8 hours total to knit a hat. But I'm kind of a slow knitter. I'm usually distracted. But anyhow, so this is worsted weight, and I dyed this yarn for a collaboration with Sherry Carabonic, the Square Dance Kit, and this is also in my store. And then we have the chunky yarns. So this is my Blazing Maple Transitions, which I just finished dyeing last weekend. And this is a chunky alpaca cotton blend. And so as a dyer, normally you would wonder like, oh, how do I dye cotton with basically a wool fiber, even though alpaca is not a wool. And surprisingly, the cotton took the dye as well. Usually you might see some flecks of places where the cotton didn't accept the dye as well, but it worked for me, which made me really happy. And I'm wondering if it's because this is mostly alpaca, 80%. So why do you want to do alpaca? Alpaca is extremely soft. I remember the first time I worked with alpaca and I loved it. When I was a young knitter or an early beginning knitter, I only worked with acrylic, what I found at like a big box store. And then I discovered merino wool and I was like, that's it, I'm never gonna work with anything else. And then I discovered alpaca, and basically I just go through phases of what I want to work with. So what's cool about this yarn is it's sourced entirely in northern Arizona. Peaceful Prairie Alpaca Ranch raises the alpacas. I get to go see them. They are adorable. And she had this made in a mill near Prescott, so again, northern Arizona, and then I dyed it. So everything is from northern Arizona, and it's a chunky weight yarn, so you can see a difference in thickness here. And what's nice about this is, even though I currently live in Flagstaff, I used to live in Tucson and Phoenix, and it isn't the best to knit in warm places because you don't always get to wear what you knit or crochet. Like, it has to be cold, or you could just like go to the U of A, and that's where I went. And they have AC on so high in the summer, you need to wear a sweatshirt in August, which sounds nuts, but it's true. So, hey, you know, go to the U of A and you'll need a hat for sure. No, I do love the U of A, go Cats. But anyhow, this is a chunky yarn. It works up really quickly. And although alpaca is extremely warm, cotton is a little less warm, and so it's a good combination. So if you live in a warmer weather, this is a great yarn because it won't be too hot. It'll work up really, really fast, and it's soft. So, and I know both wool and alpaca protect people from fires. Like, you can just, like, I wouldn't recommend knitting or crocheting something just to throw it on top of a fire. But worst case scenario, if someone's on fire, like, it will help put it out. So it's a flame retardant. Another thing that you'll find in my shop and in other places online is hand spun yarn. And so there's two ways of dyeing hand spun yarn. You can spin yarn from fiber first and then dye it, and then it would look something like this. Or you can dye it as fiber and then spin it up. And that's what happened with this one. And you can see that there are some thicker spots and some thinner spots. Everyone who I think who sells hand spun yarn still does WPI, which is wraps per inch, and that tells you roughly the weight of the yarn. What can you use hand spun yarn for? A lot of people like it because it's a little bit less predictable than milled yarn because you're going to have some thick and thin spots. It can be great for adding texture. I know weavers like to use it because of the texture, and you can use it for hats, scarves. It will just give it more texture and I don't know, add a little bit something to it. It won't look quite like if you're using a mill spun yarn. That's going to be a little bit more irregular, but usually not too irregular. You can use it for macrame, and this is really soft. There's different ways of spinning too that can make it elastic or more elastic or less elastic. There's worsted and woolen spun. That's like a whole other video that I can make. But you shouldn't be afraid of hand spun yarn. You can use it for so many things, and it's beautiful and unique. And this one is really, really soft. This is 100% merino. So I like marled yarns, which you can see that some strands have one of each color, like a black and a blue or purple. I personally like that. There's a way that you can spin where you can keep the colors consistent. Again, the topic of another video. But even once the fiber is dyed, you have choice in how you use it. So in a nutshell, you can use different yarns for different types of projects. And the faster you want a project to go, I would say the thicker the yarn, the bigger the needles. But you can use a big size needle for a thin yarn, and it'll just work up faster, and it'll have a holier look, meaning there'll be more holes in it than not. And if you want it to be super tight, you would just use smaller needles than the recommended needle gauge. If you have any questions about what yarn you should use for a project, I would be happy to help you, and I will leave my email address below, and along with a link for my Etsy store. So I hope you found this useful, and I hope you have a great day.